Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hailing from Atlanta, where today's Copa America match between the U.S. national soccer team and Panama will surely royal traffic. Oh yeah, also the presidential debate. Yeah, that's happening today too. In fact, soccer match at 6 p.m. at Mercedes-Benz Stadium downtown. And of course, the debate at 9 p.m. from the Time Warner Studios, the old Techwood campus where Turner Broadcasting sort of birthed itself in the 1970s. 10th Street between State and the Downtown Connector already shut down on adjacent street alongside McCamish Pavilion as well. And it's almost as if we're back in the pandemic for another day. We're being asked to shelter in place if at all possible. And that's good advice, honestly. And while there's plenty we could be talking about in the orbit of the presidential debate, we'll cover that tomorrow with some post-analysis instead. You know me, I'm a fact checker, so there'll be a lot of fact checking tomorrow. We'll do that tomorrow. In the meanwhile, we have the opportunity to talk with DeKalb County's new CEO-elect, and so let's do that. We are with DeKalb County CEO-elect Lorraine Cochran Johnson, who won a primary runoff just a couple of weeks ago and now has her plate full awaiting an inauguration. Will it be like an official inauguration? When do you just get sworn in? When do you hit the ground running?
Well, honestly, I sort of hit the ground running the day after. Mm-hmm. It's only been 1 week, but it does feel like an eternity. So I actually take office as of January 2nd.
Okay.
So literally, I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of work to be done, and now we're in the transition phase.
Can I just tell you, we were talking off the air before we went on here. I have been preparing for this interview by going through your campaign website, and you are thorough. I mean, thorough, like an encyclopedia. Like when I go through your campaign priorities, I'm like, oh, Lord, look, let me go make a coffee so I can get to this next one because I just went through the first. You are very thorough, though.
But, Ron, I have an MPA in economic development and grant writing. Mm-hmm. So I'm a technical writer. So I take great pain in every word that I write because, in government, I've been taught people don't want to hear or read a whole lot. So what you see there is great thought to condense a lot of really difficult information so that people understand, because, one of the things that I want to bring to DeKalb is a greater understanding from constituency really going on from day to day.
Mm-hmm. You, the thing I want to start with is the campaign itself, and you found yourself going against some heavyweight endorsements for your opponent. No hard feelings after that, though. You're ready to turn the page and get to work? How's that going to work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, relationships matter. Mm-hmm. And I was the junior most person seeking the office. I was running against one candidate with 22 years and another with 8. Mm-hmm. So here I am, 2 men with 30 years combined, and then there's me with 5 years. So both of my opponents, they focused quite heavily on endorsements. Mm-hmm. And, we're all products of our environment, Ron. And when I entered politics in 2018, I was a woman who went up against an incumbent. Mm-hmm. And it was during that time that I realized, many people, they doubt you. I often say I was underfunded, unlikely, and underestimated. Mm-hmm. Because, there's almost a written rule. You don't go up against an incumbent unless they've been found with a dead body. And, because of that, I learned very quickly in my political career that, I needed to, take my message to the people. So I never bothered, with the endorsements. I've always gone to people, and thank God, after 5 years, 3 months and 10 days, but who's counting? I had a reputation that was hard to overcome because I am very much a doer.
You come from a business background, and I often caution folks when considering candidates when they're looking at, government should be run like a business. You actually come from a business background, but I think you can probably best delineate why we should be cautious in just choosing people because they run a business for government. But coming from both, can you kind of explain the nuance?
Yes. Let me say that, I have government to be quite different from my years in corporate America. When you work for major corporations and you are a manager or, in charge of day-to-day operations, there's a great deal of structure. And also in the corporate world, it's all about productivity and what you produce. Government is different because, and I just wrote a book called Government Reimagined, where I argue that it is time we view government as a service-based organization. Mm-hmm. And we see people within the community as consumers. Mm-hmm. Because in my mind, government provides essential services. And also the interesting thing about those essential services, your sanitation, your water, your sewer, your roads, your drainage, those aren't services that you have the ability to go out and receive anywhere else.
That's right.
So we become a sole source, for those who are in procurement, you may understand what I'm saying. We are the sole source for these services we provide. And it's time that government realizes that we must master service delivery because our end users, those constituents, are your consumers. So I think if we sort of switch a little bit of the mentality there, people don't mind paying for services. They want quality services. So I found a lot of interesting thought in government, but, I sort of bring a different, I think, in somewhat new, not quite totally, but a little bit of a different perspective.
Yeah, there's always this conversation, particularly from the right, about treating government like a business because it should be super efficient and maybe even turn a profit, and of course, eschewing any deficit spending. But again, business has the luxury, I guess, of seeking profit and trying to avoid deficits. And when you're in government, you don't have the option of saying, well, I'm just going to close some services because we're not meeting the numbers. You still have to provide for your citizens. That's kind of what I was driving at.
Right. And let me say to you, and that's why it's even more important for the service delivery, because folks don't have an option. You can't go out there and shop for governmental services in the same manner that you do your cable provider.
Right. That's true.
So for me, that's why it's even more important to master the service delivery. So, I've looked, throughout the years at how we deliver services, where we are. I've looked at other jurisdictions to determine best practices. Mm-hmm. And, there are some areas that get it right. With, Dekalb, there are some areas where we need improvement. Mm-hmm. I openly admit that. And I'm a huge proponent for things like SLAs, service level agreements. There should never be a time in my Dekalb where people reach out and they do not understand what service looks like. So if you are going through planning and sustainability and you're in need of a water sewer capacity report, then I expect to have in writing an agreement that you can expect service within a 7 to 21 day window. Mm-hmm. Still have to, I'm in the transition phase and sitting with department heads because we want to be realistic.
Yeah.
For us, even with defining what service looks like will be monumental because, when I came to Dekalb in 2018, there were over 308 water sewer capacity reports waiting for responses. And these are developers. These are people who want to do business in Dekalb and could not hook up to our water system because they were awaiting water sewer capacity reports. Mm. And in many instances, I found that a large majority of those folks had been waiting for at least 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
And those are the kind of things, we've gotten that list down now to 60 was the last count. And, I do want to acknowledge that when I ran for CEO, I was required to resign my position. So many reports I have not received since March 10th. But again, I look forward to us continuing to bring those and creating realistic expectations because we've invested 1.4 billion in infrastructure so increase water sewer capacity because honestly it was hindering growth of DeKalb in certain areas.
Absolutely. You, I think, sort of threaded the needle a little bit in your campaign literature where you commended outgoing CEO Michael Thurmond, but we're also scrolling down a little bit, quick to point out that the much talked about, much debated Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility, which is in DeKalb County, but not a DeKalb County entity, was something that, as you being on the commission, had no input on. It just kind of happened, and you found out about it through local media. You are now tasked with at least being in place as CEO of DeKalb County to ensure that the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility lives up to promises made to its neighbors. Can you speak to that?
Oh, absolutely. You are correct. I found out that the facility was moving ground by an article that may have appeared in the business. And then, of course, there was a press release that went out. So that's how I gained knowledge of it. So you are correct. That article talked about the conversations at that time between Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and, of course, CEO Mike Thurmond. Now we're at a point, the ship has sailed.
Yeah.
And, I had to be very forthright because, it was very controversial. But I do want to say to all the listeners out there, I want people to understand that, modern policing is far different than 2 decades ago. Now, when it comes to policing and public safety, it's different. Technology plays a major role in outcomes. So I do plan to fully staff and develop a real-time technology center. But we do need a facility that allows us to adequately train our officers and our frontline responders in technology and in best practices. I believe somewhere along the line, Ron, the narrative was misconstrued. And that's what happens when you don't create your own narrative, people will do it for you. And, some people say that, it's highly militarized. And no, it will teach de-escalation. It will deal with a variety of very important topics for training. But in terms of all deliverables, I expect them to be in place. But I do also want to say that, of course, the land was owned by the city of Atlanta, although it was on the DeKalb side. And there are certain portions of DeKalb that, are in Atlanta and certain portions of Atlanta that are in DeKalb.
Right.
So it's a lot. There's a lot to do there. But right now, my first conversation with current Mayor Andre Dickens was negotiating the use of the facility for our officers, because that has not previously occurred. And it makes no sense that we have a $4.4 billion state-of-the-art facility that could be utilized for our frontline responders and police, and DeKalb County does not have access to that facility.
That's a valid point. Pushback from those who oppose the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility, specifically surrounding it, is the environmental impact. So how will you see to it as CEO of DeKalb County that the environmental impact is mitigated, that the promises made are going to be held up?
Well, it's just a matter of, honestly, we are all keenly aware of the promises that are made, just calling them to the table for the deliverables. And thus far, I know we've kept a very watchful eye I do know that, Entrenchment Creek in certain areas, there's been concern because some portions of the park have been shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And my only concern from that standpoint is public safety.
Mm.
And during that time, there was, based upon the information I was given, cause for concern because of certain, bombs that had been found. But we have not, as of recent, I'm not aware of any adverse conditions. So I do look forward to ensuring that we give and continue to have accessibility to our green space by the residents of the community, because that's really important.
We're talking with Lorraine Cochran Johnson, the DeKalb County CEO-elect as of just a couple of weeks ago. You're listening to The Ron Show. Follow along on your preferred social media platform with The Ron Show. That would be at Ron Show ATL. We're on with Lorraine Cochran Johnson, incoming DeKalb County CEO-elect. Let's talk housing. You obviously are keenly aware of the housing crisis that we are dealing with nationally and how it impacts us even here locally, with Atlanta projecting to have nearly 8 million residents within the next decade and a half. There is, and you're speaking to a residential real estate agent, a realtor, there is a shortage of affordable housing for those to rent and for first-time home buyers. There isn't that starter home that first-time home buyer can really buy. What do you want to do? What would you like to see done to make DeKalb County a home, a destination for first-time home buyers who don't see the inventory there right now?
Well, let me say to you, I'm going to share first what I've done. When I came into DeKalb, and, this is unique because depending upon where you are in DeKalb, it defines the issue. Right. And south of Memorial Drive, I consider Memorial Drive to be somewhat of the Mason-Dixon line between the north and south.
Right.
And over 50% of properties, I think around 52 to be exact, sold south of Memorial Drive that are residential properties are not sold to individuals like you and me and listeners. They're sold to LLCs,
Yep.
Wall Street, private investors.
Yep.
And in some instances, because, the state of Georgia prohibits us from having a rental registry, which would require anyone who purchases a property within a residential community to give constructive notice that it is being used as a or income generating property. Independent of that registry, what we only think is what is literally in order to receive a homestead exemption, you must live in the house as your primary residence. So with that data and using what's at our disposal, we've determined that south of Memorial Drive, there's some communities with over 30% rentals.
Oh, man.
So understanding that many of the folks that want to purchase, particularly first-time home buyers, the biggest encumbrance is the deposit.
Mm-hmm.
So, or the down payment, I should say.
Sure.
So I actually partnered in 2018 with Operation Hope. And through a federal program, we do 100% down payment assistance up to $250,000. So I'm happy to say that we've created 91 new homeowners, and it has resulted in a little over $22 million in down payment assistance and first-time home loans. Now, one of the things that I plan to do is, LIHTCs currently, and for those listening, LIHTCs or low-income housing tax credits are currently the number one tool that's used for the development of affordable housing. But what you find with a LIHTC is it only requires that 10% of the homes are actually low income or affordable. Mm. So if you're building 100 units and you say, okay, I'm going to give you your 10%, that means I only get 10 affordable housing units, and the other 90 units can be at market value. Mm. And that's not helping us, honestly, no. Because currently we have over 20,000 people on a waiting list for affordable housing. So in order for us to change what we see, Ron, we're going to have to offer more incentives. And when I say incentives, things like public-private partnerships, potentially tax abatements, And honestly, we can be creative because one of DeKalb's greatest assets is we are still rich in land. Mm. And the county owns a lot of that land. So leveraging land that we may own with builders who are willing to develop the inventory that we need to put a dent in affordable housing is going to be necessary. So you can expect to see out of me more public-private partnerships. I will also have what I call a CHOA, a Chief Housing Officer. Mm. That person will work out of my office, and that will be their only job, is to get out there and develop housing. And it won't be just a focus on affordable, but we'll look at marketplace as well as workforce housing. Because DeKalb has lagged behind the region in the development of housing, period. Mm-hmm. We're behind.
We're up against a hard break, so we're going to take a quick one and come back and continue our conversation with Lorraine Cochran-Johnson. I'm hearing a lot of sprawl talk, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll let her clear that up. When the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast.
Take the Ron Show wherever you go. Download the America One Radio app to your smartphone and listen on the go. Or in traffic wishing you were on the go. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
That'll be the case today for sure. Between Copa America downtown, 6 p.m. match between Panama and the U.S. soccer program, and the presidential debate, snarling Midtown traffic, and between the airport and Midtown with two motorcades coming through. Just a fantastic. Sheltering in place is the new norm for us again today, revisiting our pandemic roots. Thank you for listening. We are with new DeKalb County CEO-elect Lorraine Cochran-Johnson. We were talking about housing when we had to take a quick break there, and I felt like I was listening to a little bit of sprawl talk. So when I hear land use and housing, I think of sprawl. Density obviously is something that Metro Atlanta sort of trails for a top 10 metro area in the U.S. And that also brings me to mass transit, something that I get the sense that you probably want to push MARTA to be a little smarter with their expenditures, because high density rail is something that is sorely lacking in DeKalb County, despite being part of the MARTA network. I think we saw where the connection from Emory to some of the east-west lines came down to bus rapid transit versus, rail transit. Talk to me about your relationship going forward with MARTA.
Well, let me say to everyone that's listening, DeKalb, South Fulton, and the city of Atlanta, we were the original three over 40 years ago who went to the General Assembly in support of MARTA. Well, to this date, DeKalb, although we actually carried the resolution, still do not have high capacity transit. And I choose to use that term rather than just say MARTA sometimes.
Sure.
But we don't have high capacity transit that runs north, south, east, and west.
Right.
And I want to be clear that MARTA has been clear with us, although we have invested a penny for well over 40 years, that we will owe that penny into perpetuity for what we already have. And with that, if we plan to expand transit, then we will need to come up with a plan to do so. Because the penny that we've given, they will receive it and it will be payable into perpetuity for two things. That's the cost of good repair and the cost of administration. And we will get nothing more than what we have.
Right.
So, right now we're in a unique time because, with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was passed under Biden's administration, there's an unprecedented amount of funds available on the federal level. But DeKalb cannot currently make application for a project because all of those funds, it just isn't, I want to do it, and you receive what you need. It requires matching funds from DeKalb. So we're looking at either an 80-40 or a 60-40 split. And because we've not set aside a dedicated funding source, we're not in a position to make application for funds for a project. So that is at the top of my priority list because this is an unprecedented amount of funds and they will not be available forever.
Right.
And every day that we wait, I want the good people of DeKalb to know that we are placing ourselves in an adverse position.
But let me ask you this, because I'm trying to read through the lines here a little bit. Are you contemplating perhaps DeKalb County forming its own mass transit authority that would work in concert with MARTA, because you don't seem to be getting what you need from MARTA?
Well, I won't say that. I blame us as the electeds, not MARTA. Because when we made the allocation, we should have been clear and okay, what does this look like? But we bought into the pot. And when we had the opportunity, it was 2019 that I joined the Board of Commissioners. And at that time, that's when the 15th Amendment came. And I was clear, I was the only commissioner at the time to vote against the 15th Amendment to the MARTA agreement. And I voted against it because this isn't the U.S. Constitution. Why are we amending an agreement that we've had over 40 years that's antiquated for a 15th time? It's time for us to go back to the table and negotiate new terms. And within those terms, it was my desire that a portion of our monies were set aside specifically for DeKalb, because that's something we've never done. But when Clayton went to the table, that's exactly what they did. So that allows you to better plan for the future, because you know what money you have in the pot that has to be invested in your projects alone. However, the Board of Commissioners, again, I was the only one to vote against it, went in a different direction. MARTA doesn't encumber us from coming to a firm decision on the mode of transit that we desire and the path. We in DeKalb to date have not been successful in developing even that. So I don't want to blame MARTA for what we have not done, because I've served as chair of Public Works and Infrastructure for 3 years. And I've had these conversations with everyone from MARTA's president, Collie Greenwood, to the president and director of the ARC, Anna Roach, to our Commissioner of Transportation, McMurray, to the director of the ATL. Everyone has expressed their enthusiasm in supporting our plan and coming to the table with resources. But we have to develop the plan.
Understood. Let's speak about your youngest citizens in DeKalb County. Schools are obviously an important factor for folks who are going to be relocating from all over the country, throughout the state, into Metro Atlanta. You want to make DeKalb County a destination. How do you improve DeKalb's school system from your position as county CEO, so that when folks ask, "What about the schools?" folks react, "Oh, they're fantastic"?
Well, let me say to you, one thing that I am is a realist. And, I have watched even before, when my daughter was young, the turnover of leadership and the issues within DeKalb County schools.
Right.
But I want to say to everyone that I'm a huge proponent for public education. And over the years, I've been a champion for DeKalb schools. I'm the product of public schools. As a taxpayer, I expect the best schools possible. I don't think, it's sort of like cityhood. I've often said that good government is the key to eradicating cityhood. Good schools is the key to ending vouchers. Let's get it right. And tax serve that. It's time we get it right. For me, I want to be a bigger partner in my administration than I've seen in previous years. And when I say a bigger partner, although people say often, schools have nothing to do with government.
Sure.
But they have nothing to do with government, because the quality of schools affects your quality of life. It affects your property value. It also affects economic development.
It does have that ripple effect. You're right.
Yeah. So you can't separate schools from government and say, they go do their own thing. So, over the years, I have invested more in our school system and programs for youth than any other sitting commissioner. And it's just because I worked in the school system so much because of my daughter, I was keenly aware of the needs. So I look forward to continuing to be a partner, but expanding. I actually have a program that starts this fall that is a violence geared towards, violence, because what we're seeing is an uptick in crime amongst young people and violence. And, the school system, they're just like government, they're faced with doing increasingly more with less.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes investments from people like me, as a commissioner who had the capacity and the resources to invest in programs that take a more comprehensive approach. Because, modern education, in my opinion, and that's a different show, Ron, because I have an opinion about most stuff. But, modern education, if it's only teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, it's failing children.
That's right.
Because now children need to be taught soft skills. They need to be taught communication, conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Our young people need to even have a firm understanding of mental health. All of these things are extremely important. And, my violence program, it's called the School Nonviolence Initiative that starts this fall. It has a variety of assemblies that bring in guest speakers. It teaches children communication, conflict resolution. Ignorance is no defense. It even teaches them a little bit of law, because we have young people that go to jail because they don't understand the difference between assault and battery.
Right.
Battery is simply defined as harmful or offensive touching. It doesn't matter what your intent was, but if you put a finger on a person and they didn't want you to, that's battery.
Mm.
And a crime that's punishable by fine or imprisonment. When it comes to assault, all you have to do is yell at someone. And if there is a reasonable fear of injury or harm, then that is considered assault, whether your intent was to scare or frighten them. So we make sure that children are educated. We also focus on post-secondary education. Because, one of the things that I get really in my feelings about is the fact that Georgia has 18 free trades to any young person who has a high school diploma.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't hear people talk about that.
You're right.
Those trades should be on every, and under my leadership, will be on every billboard in DeKalb County. Because I do not want to see one child graduate from high school that does not have a post-secondary education plan. I'm tired of seeing us as bureaucrats put money on crime prevention. But if you are smart, you understand that the number one factor that affects crime is economics.
That's right. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't. You're absolutely right.
Yes. And these are the conversations that I don't hear smart people talk about. So let's talk about what we're going to do to ensure that we have children that have, if not college, then there are great trades out there. And many of those trades start young people at a higher salary than does a 4-year degree. I don't care what you do, but you're going to be productive in society, and we're going to make sure these young people are doing something.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, it's not sexy talk to talk about plumbing and electrical work or construction, but we are in a market with a construction boom, and that's good money to be making for, future generations of, DeKalb County High School graduates. You make a valid point. We are talking with Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, the incoming DeKalb County CEO-elect. This is The Ron Show. Have just a few more minutes of today's show. We're having a fantastic, robust conversation with the incoming DeKalb County CEO-elect, Lorraine Cochran-Johnson. You mentioned something about mental health a few minutes ago, and this will be my last question. I'll let you get on with the rest of your day, since I know you're so busy. Mental health, we were talking about mental health. Homelessness is, of course, at an epidemic level here in Metro Atlanta, as most major cities are facing it. And it's not necessarily a creation of the metro area as much as we are a destination for houselessness and homelessness. You can't get off a major highway without coming to an on-ramp and seeing folks panhandling. And how do you plan to tackle homelessness within DeKalb County?
Let me say that, the face of homelessness is honestly, Ron, not different from yours and mine.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It is
and
multicultural. You're absolutely right.
yeah, and I want people who are listening to think carefully about this next statement. Most of us that are within my voice, if we were to sell our homes, we couldn't afford to buy them back.
That's right.
So, what I'm really concerned with is the widening gap between the haves and have nots. Before leaving office, I had a keen interest in the buy for rent market and trying to do something to stop the disturbing trend that I was seeing. So I paid for my own housing study, and Ernst and Young completed the study.
Mm.
And do you know, Ron, that in order for a person who earns minimum wage to afford a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment in metro Atlanta, they would need to work 144 hours a week.
Which is not possible. I think we know this.
It's unrealistic. So as it relates to the increasing amount of people that are becoming homeless, one of the things that we have to do, and I believe on the state level, we have to repeal the code that prohibits rental rate caps.
Mm.
Because over a 2-year period in metro Atlanta, we saw rent increase 36%.
Yeah.
Income is not increasing at the rate of rent. So you're creating more pad splits. These are situations where multiple families are living under one roof.
Right.
Because that's the only thing that they can afford to do. And, if we would pay attention to history and look at California and look at New York, we would see where they are, and we're headed there. And it's frightening for me because enough isn't being done to stop that. So also expanding inventory, because we recently passed a cottage ordinance that allows developers to now produce homes that are 1,200 square feet or less. And also, I'd like to see a container home ordinance passed so that we can create, products that don't have as large of a footprint, but are highly desirable in the marketplace and are more affordable. So those are all things, as well as leveraging public-private partnerships for the increased development of affordable housing. Because honestly, the housing issue now, and also I want to say that by and large, the last report I saw before I left Dekalb, we were housing about 800 people. Mm-hmm. But, government is not really in the business of housing. Mm-hmm. We deliver essential services. So when we're housing people, that means that's a cost to the taxpayers of Dekalb. And in some instances, it is the right thing to do because we can't have homeless mothers with children.
Right.
But we also have to make fishermen and not feed people a fish for a day. So working with agencies for wraparound services that teach job skills. I also fund Ref Code, which is a coding program that, moves people towards a livable wage. All of those things are going to be necessary and will be a part of my administration.
And those are for the folks that can be helped, but obviously because we don't properly fund mental health in this country and haven't for decades now, and the state isn't picking up the slack, it falls on the communities. So again, I wanted to broach mental health as well. You have some notes about that in your campaign that I wanted to touch on a little bit.
Absolutely, and let me say, by and large, the people that you find on the street, as a general rule, and I'd say 90% of those folks are going to suffer from a mental illness or a drug dependency.
Right. They
refuse assistance from the county because in order to receive our assistance, it comes with some requirements. If we're providing the housing, there's curfews. There are rules. And unfortunately, they are not in a position to live in a structured environment.
Right.
I've seen some pretty horrible things where, I've gone so far as to track down family that say, well, I've sort of washed my hands of that. And independent of family intervention or someone getting the power of attorney of an individual who suffers from mental illness, the county can't require you to receive treatment.
Right.
There's a lot of heartbreaking things out there and slippery slopes that we deal with.
And I always point out that we live in a country where universal healthcare is not a human right. We don't have universal healthcare. And that if we did, mental health, of course, falling under that umbrella, that would do so much to aid us with dealing with homelessness, houselessness, and mental wellness in this country. Because you're right, a lot of families of those who are unhoused or homeless, they have had to wash their hands of it and can't afford to care for that individual out of their own pocket. And without, again, healthcare is a human right, there just aren't many options. It's unfortunate.
It really is. And, I mean, recently during the campaign, I was out one morning. It was a Friday night, and it was probably somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, because that's a good time for me to check on my signs and, operate without the traffic of the day.
Of course.
Because most of my day is already filled with something else. And, I encountered a gentleman, and, I want to caution us as individuals from being judgmental of people that we encounter. And initially I was a little frightened because, I was in a wrapped van and it had DeKalb County CEO, vote. Right. So he started to talk. And the more he talked, I began to realize, oh my God, this is a very highly intelligent gentleman. And, as I spoke with him, he explained how he came to his current fate. And, it was the loss of the love of his life, during COVID, during that era, and him not being able to mentally move forward, and just almost becoming so angry he rejected society and life. And now he's homeless. So I immediately, made calls to assist him because he still works every day. So there's a lot of people out there, and we have to be more caring. We have to get out there because, beyond being a CEO, this is for me a ministry of caring about people. And there's some people that simply need help and a hand up. And a hand up is not a handout.
Right.
It's just what's necessary, because we all have to progress as a society together. And there's consequences. And we have to get people off the street, develop more housing, assist with mental illness, medication where necessary, and diagnosis. Because those are going to be critical in the future.
Well, it's all encompassing. It talks a lot about what your focus was when running for this position, and now it's yours. So as of January 2nd, the Dekalb CEO-elect, Lorraine Cochran-Johnson. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and having this robust conversation on The Ron Show. We appreciate it.
No, I thank you. And, you've always been most pleasant, and I look forward to coming back periodically to tell you where we are. Because I do want to be accountable to the people, and I look forward to representing all of DeKalb.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. Take care.
Lorraine and I met 8 months ago, actually, at Manuel's Tavern before Heather Cox Richardson swooped in to sign some books and speak at the Carter Presidential Library. And I'm not going to lie, I met a lot of people at that event, and Lorraine was the one that stood out. I mean, she wears her trademark thick frame glasses, so it's hard not to forget her. But honestly, it was her personality, her energy, her vigor. She's a magnetic type of individual. You're drawn to her. And I, again, having reviewed her campaign website, and she has so much information for you to digest. You just know she comes into this job prepared. It'll be fantastic to watch her fly in this role when she takes that office in January. All right. Debate night, gird your loins, get the mental wellness in beforehand, because we'll be covering the debate tomorrow, fact-checking and clearing up mistruths, because there will be some when we come back tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for listening. You can hear this entire conversation again, 5 to 6 p.m. on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. It'll be on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com and available via podcast later in the day. Show notes, as always, at RonShowATL.com.